this morning. Let us pray. Prepare our hearts, O God, to accept your word. Help us to hear your voice so that we can follow in your ways and obey your will. We ask this through Jesus Christ. Amen. I'm going to begin from a reading from Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. Jesus and his disciples, a very memorable experience together. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed the crowd, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea, but when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. Beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand, caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are of God." For second reading, we turn to selected verses from the 27th. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Into verse 5. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his hand. He will set me high. Rock. Verse 7. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud, be gracious to me and answer me. Then down to part of verse 9. Do not cast me off, do not forsake me, O God, my salvation. Verse 11 says, Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. And Psalm 27 concludes with these two verses. I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. God bless your understanding these readings from. I'm going to read today from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus' disciples are in a boat when a very strong wind. It doesn't say that it was a storm, it may have been, but it was a very strong wind. And then they become afraid when they see Jesus coming to him, walking on the water. Now, over the years, I have heard people say, well, he didn't really walk on the water, but maybe there were some rocks underneath and it really looked like that. And other people said, oh no, he certainly did walk on the water. And Jesus had power even over death. Well, he couldn't have done that. But I hope even with what is some disagreement people have, we won't miss what's at the heart of our reading today. And that is that Jesus' disciples were free. And Jesus challenged faith, called out for doubt. So what do we do when we're in trouble? What do we do when we're feeling helpless or afraid? In Jesus' terms, like in our reading today, are we people also of faith? Do we, like the disciples in that reading, really wonder if we can overcome our troubles, get beyond our fears? I read about what happened in another community of Jesus followers some years ago. It happened in a well-to-do Episcopal church in Minnesota. A young priest had been sent to that church on a temporary assignment, and as he listened to what was going on in the church, he felt something was going on there beneath the surface. I mean, on the one hand, it appeared the church was doing its best, but he was concerned there was something there that he couldn't really put his finger on. So he went to an older priest who had been connected with that church for a long time and said, well, what's going on here? What am I missing? And the older priest said, try the word fear. And it turned out he was right. The people in this church, and it had all kinds of company presidents and vice presidents. It had people who were politicians, elected officials, people who were insurance agents and stockbrokers and restaurant owners. But it seems that so many of them had fear that things were not going to turn out all right. They were concerned that maybe there'd be a mistake, maybe that they would make or someone would make. There'd be change in management, there'd be an economic downturn. And they had fear then that their life would take it down, that things were not really going to be all right. They were afraid of what might happen. I read recently what I thought were some interesting things about dogs in our country. Some years ago, the American Dudley Poodles were the most popular purebred dog in America. Then 20 years later, the number of those poodles had been cut in half. And Rottweilers were a number 2%. And a lot of it had to do with fear. Fear about what was happening in our culture, in our society. And yet, when Jesus' disciples were afraid, what did he say to them? It is I, do not be afraid. And he called them not to be afraid, yeah, in faith. Now, to step out in faith may mean something different for all of us who are here today. Friedrich Digest told about a young man named Nathaniel. He was a freshman in high school and part of an ROTC program in school. And that means that this program would lead him someday to be an officer. But one of the things he had to do as part of this program was to go to the annual military ball. And he could either find someone to go as a date or. So he talked to his friend Jason. Jason, what are you going to do? Are you going to ask anybody to the military ball? And here's what Jason said. Look, I can go to war, but I can never ask for it. And I think we all may have a fear or two. Maybe we don't want anybody to know about it. We all may have fear of something. And our fears, they may kind of keep us right there in the boat. And we're really called in faith. Elizabeth Blackwell wanted to become a doctor. But this was in the 1840s when women in our countries just were not. But Elizabeth Blackwell really persevered, finally got into a medical school. And she applied there, and the male students there voted for her to become a member of that school, but they were only kidding. But the head of the school didn't know it, and so he invited Elizabeth Blackwell to become a student. But when she did it, the students made fun of her. Some of the professors said they didn't really even want her in class. But she refused to give up. And in 1849, she graduated at the end. And then after she graduated, no hospital would hire her, so she started a hospital on her own. And then eventually even opened up medical school. Elizabeth Blackwell had the faith to step out of the boat and ended up doing very well despite the many challenges that she faced. Some of you, I think, are familiar with the series of books called Chicken Soup for the Soul. I don't know how many there are, but they tell some interesting stories about people's lives. Bill Sanders, in one of these books, wrote an article about a neighbor he had named Vicky. Vicky was in seventh grade, and she's diagnosed with leukemia. She went through chemotherapy, lost her hair. She was a popular girl in school, but she didn't have any hair, which kind of set her apart in an unhappy way from her peers. And for a seventh grader, in brief, some of her classmates were mean to her. They snatched the wig off her. They would laugh at her. They wouldn't sit with her in the period or math. And those who had lockers on either side of her, they vacated them. Nikki told her neighbor Bill that she could handle losing her hair, and that through her faith in God, she could handle dying. But she said the most difficult part was losing her friend. Her parents understood her situation and said, well, you don't have to go to school. But then she heard about another seventh grader in another state. He carried a Bible to school with him every day, and he was teased and taunted with bullies. And then one day he had enough. He handed his Bible to one of those bullies, back his biggest tormentor, and said to him, here, see if you've got the courage to carry around this Bible just one day. And with that, his tormentors became his friends. So the next Monday, Nikki set out to school. Her parents drove her there. And when she got to school, she said, Mom and Dad, you know what I'm going to do today? And her eyes filled up with tears, and she said, today I'm going to find out who my real friend is. And she took off her wig and left it in. And then she asked for her parents' prayers, and she went into school. And as it turned out, well, she said, my classmates are going to take me for who I am, or they don't take me at all. I'm going to find out who my. And without a wig, she went to school. Nobody bullied or taught. I don't know what stepping out in faith would mean for you today. I don't know, for some, like Nikki, it would mean having the courage to go back to school. For others, it might mean at work, asking for a different job, promotion. For some church folk, to step out in faith might mean taking the step of inviting someone to join in the church, actually sharing their faith. But in whatever way we need to step out, let us remember the words of the psalmist. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Of whom shall I be afraid? And remember also these words of Jesus. Do not be afraid. I don't know what happened in that fearful Episcopal church. I don't know if Jason actually invited somebody to go with him to the military. But I believe that Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell and seventh grader Nikki, and later so many of Jesus that we read about did what they were called. We are called to do the same. Trusting in Jesus' call to live in faith. Even when what we're called to do may seem as daunting or maybe as impossible.